Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Mayo Clinic Social Media Network webinar. I'm really pleased that you've joined us today. I'm Dan Hinman. I'm the Community Director for the network, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. We're excited to have with us Chris Austin, and Chris her tips on how to use social media to find new donors and meet your fundraising goals. So Chris will speak for about 30 or 40 minutes in her presentation. Afterwards, we'll go to the Q&A session. This is a really valuable part of the webinar, and it's continuing, of course, on your questions. So I want you to be thinking about any questions you might have for Chris. Enter them into the comment box to the right side of the video, and then we'll be monitoring those, of course, during the webinar. And at the Q&A part, then we'll make sure that Chris has a chance to answer those questions. So we look forward to your comments and your questions as we go through the webinar. Before I introduce Chris, I want to let you know about a few upcoming events for the community. First of all, next month, our webinar will be held on May 22nd. It will feature Daniel Woody and Christopher Abbott from Indiana University Health. Their title of their presentation is Social Media, the New Call Center. So IU Health decided that they would set a standard to respond to every message on a social platform within 10 minutes. And as you can imagine, that was an aggressive standard, and they've learned some things as they've gone through the process, and they're going to share those with us. What went right? What were the challenges with that? What have they seen as a result of engagement, et cetera, by following that practice? So you can register for that webinar now. Tune in with us next month. Also, on June 11th, we'll be holding our next social media residency. This one will be in Rochester. And if you've completed the social media basics for healthcare certificate, this is really the next step in getting some quality education and learning in social media. It's a day-long program that includes how-tos and strategy and other kinds of things. We think those who attend it always really enjoy it. If you're a basic member and you're attending this seminar as a basic member, if you register for the residency on June 11th, that includes a one-year membership in the community. So you don't have to pay a membership and pay for the residency. You get both if you come to residency. So check that out on the website. It's in a little orange bar below the main banner today. And if you're already a premium member, then you can get a 25% discount on residency. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is that we're deep into planning for our annual conference, which will be held November 14th and 15th in Jacksonville, Florida. We're very excited. We've got 4 really amazing keynotes nailed down, and we've got another 12 or so presenters, some workshops, some expert consultations. It's going to be a really great conference. So watch the news. We're going to be announcing all the details here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So pay attention to your emails, visit the site. We want you to be aware of that conference as soon as we have all those details to share. So with that much preparation for upcoming months, let me take a minute now to introduce you to Chris Austin. We're really excited to have her today. Chris has been a member of our external advisory board for a number of years. She also has been a chief resident at some of our residencies. She's been a friend of mine for a few years. She's smart, she's funny, she's got great things to say, so I think you're really going to enjoy her presentation. So a little more background about her. She's the owner of KS Austin Communications. Her firm creates strategic digital marketing programs and content that meet business goals for private medical practices, hospitals, and nonprofits. But before going solo, Chris introduced social media and online marketing at one of the country's largest behavioral healthcare agencies. When she did that, her efforts led to a 25% increase in new donors annually and 270% in first-time donations in a single year. So she's coming with some great experience, some on-the-ground experience in using social media to generate new donors and donations. Since then, she's developed digital marketing programs with measurable results for clients like Stanford Healthcare, ParentTalk.com, private medical practices and the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation. She also has a degree in journalism from Humboldt University in California. So, Chris, we're ready for you now to share with us some of your great ideas. So turn the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate it. And welcome to everybody who's listening in today. And I want to encourage you, like Dan did, to be thinking about questions you might have as I go through this. Anything that comes up, other than world peace, I can probably handle it. So let me just start by asking person behind the scenes there to switch to the next slide and let you know that in 2006, my website manager walked into my office and said, "Hey, Facebook has opened its platform and I think we should be on it." And my first thought was, my face, what? Because remember that at that point, MySpace was actually the biggest social media platform. And a bunch of college students were excited about this Facebook thing, but the rest of us hadn't really heard about it. And my second thought, as most nonprofit people will ask, is, well, how much is this going to cost? We didn't know, obviously, at the time, how huge and powerful Facebook would become. A little more background. Dan mentioned briefly, I was the director of communications for one of the largest behavioral health agencies in the country, and we were working with kids and families in crisis. And although we served 38 out of the 58 counties around California, I absolutely didn't have the budget to market the nonprofit. So, here I was trying to get us into newspapers and local media and radio and TV. And I was spending all my precious budget on brochures and advertising. I'm sure some of you might have been through that. And my website manager wanted to do this Facebook thing. I had no idea what she was talking about. So next slide. In 2010, we were seeing an increase in website traffic, at least 30% year over year. Specifically in 2010, we saw the number of first-time online donors increase by a minimum of that year, I think it was actually 30%, but we were watching it annually happening at 25 to 30%. And by the following fiscal year 11, we actually saw a 278% increase in the amount of money raised online. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to direct your attention to that huge number, because I know it doesn't seem possible, but yes, it's very real. The first time my team walked in and told me that, I said, that can't be true. And I sent them back to check. I ended up sending them back to check 5 times before I would finally believe that, oh my gosh, we had actually broken through this incredible number. There were no major events at the agency that year. The CEO didn't retire. We didn't have a huge blowout event. This money was coming from new donors only. And I promise you, we really raised more than $1 the year prior. So this was not $278. So to the next slide, let me tell you how we got there. And the next slide, as we look at a map of California, you can see California is probably one of the toughest to govern in the nation. We had, our organization, 13 programs in 5 different regions, as I mentioned, covering 38 out of the 58 counties. Governor Jerry Brown has said that you need a minimum of $100 million to run for office in California. And the reason is that we have 2 out of the top 5 media markets here in the state. It's crazy. LA is number 2, and the San Francisco Bay Area is number 4 in the top 5. So there was no way we were going to get to the audience of prospective donors through traditional media. And along came social media, and it really opened an opportunity for us. It gave us an incredible opportunity for much greater reach, a much lower price point. Now, there's a lot of detail to unpack in all of this, and I am going to keep this at the 50,000-foot level. And if you buy me a glass of wine or a soda later on, I promise I will tell you about all the mistakes we made along the way, because there were a lot of U-turns. So next slide, please. What happened in the very short form is Google Analytics that we had attached to the website allowed us to see people clicking through from different sites, not just Facebook, not just one social media platform, but wherever they were coming from to our site. And so we thought, well, hey, let's be smart. Let's add a link to our donation page from Facebook. And we got absolutely nothing. And I know that won't surprise you, but we got zippo, and we were so crushed. Why? Well, because we hadn't built a relationship with those new visitors yet. Or perhaps online donating was still new at that point. But I strongly suspect it was because people just didn't know who we were yet. We hadn't established our credibility with them. So in the next slide, we kept posting. We kept going and trying new different social media sites. We kept looking at Google Analytics to see where they were coming from. This won't surprise most of you that the top 2 pages were the jobs page, because everybody wanted to see if we were hiring, and the About Us page. But they also really looked through stories that we had about youth, and that seemed to really help. We added a landing page with a specific call to action. Sometimes it said sign up for our newsletter. Sometimes it said volunteer. Originally on the sign up for our newsletter, we just asked for an email address, but we realized within a couple months that wasn't sufficient. We really needed a name and a zip code to compare it to our donor database behind the scenes. And our vice president was really clear. She really wanted us measuring just new donors, just new prospects. Now, I should make a footnote here that we've just seen a study from 2017, and we know now that email revenue increased by 24% last year and accounted for 28% of all online giving. The open rates have declined slightly, but email still accounts for the largest ROI for all digital marketing. So that benchmark report coming from M+R Benchmark, I think really makes the case that we really still need to gather those email addresses. In next slide, what changed? If you give us that huge leap from the first year to a few years later, well, like I said, first of all, social media allowed people to start getting to know the organization better. But second, and I think just as importantly, there was a way for visitors to click from a post that they might have seen on a news site or out somewhere in the internet directly to the nonprofit's website. That made a big difference. Unlike mainstream media where they might read about us in the newspaper and then have to go to the computer, now they could go A to B. It was pretty easy. And the next slide, it finally dawned on me that what we had was a traditional marketing funnel or conversion funnel. That green arrow at the top that shows marketing action should probably point to all the different levels in this funnel. But to go through it quickly, you can see at the top that awareness refers to an organization on the internet, whether that's a social media platform. It's not the website. It's other places that are referring back to the organization. Consideration, I would also call that engagement. You start to engage visitors and they're starting to share your posts, or they're retweeting, or they're commenting, or they're pinning. Preference means that they started clicking through to our landing pages, checking out the website, learning more about us. And action, obviously, they finally responded to the call to action. Loyalty meant that they became a repeat donor, or they registered for an event, or they supported the nonprofit. They continued to support the nonprofit in other ways. And once we recognized the funnel, we could experiment with different ways to engage at different levels. For example, when did they share our Facebook posts with their friends? What specific kinds of things caused them to do that? And we got some really interesting data out of it. In the next slide, I will be the first one to admit that Facebook has changed significantly over the years. Donors can now even donate on the Facebook platform, which is now free to nonprofits, which is terrific. Would I suggest that or recommend it? I have to say I probably would not. My concern is that Facebook collects all those donations, And I have heard that from a couple of clients that it may be months before they actually see the check from Facebook. So there doesn't seem to be a good process on the Facebook side yet for this. But more importantly, you, the organization, needs to hold the donor relationship. Your development team's probably pounded that into your head. I know mine did to me. And you know what? Facebook is lousy at cultivating your donor. So I really wanted to make sure that we captured the relationship. We had a way of being in communication with them. That was really critical to our process. And the next slide. So where should you start? The following slide, I really drilled down on who our donors were. The development team pushed back pretty hard on the communications team at that point and said, oh, we have so many donors, we can't possibly know who they are. Well, we do know that 20% of your donors are going to give 80% of the donations. So who's that top 20%? What's the gender? What's the age range? What are their interests? Why are they giving? For healthcare organizations, that's usually a pretty easy answer. They're probably patients or past patients or loved ones of patients. And what topics get them energized? That's something that you can look through the data from your website and figure out, what are they coming back to repeatedly? Maybe it's cancer prevention or post-treatment care, or are they looking for a doctor? Are they going through doctor bios if that's available on your website? If so, maybe you need to have your doctors doing more on the internet, like an online video or a Facebook Live session might be a good idea. In the next slide, let's talk about the different platforms real quick. You've heard, I'm sure, about the changes to the Facebook algorithm. If you haven't already seen the impact on Facebook, page views and engagement is through the floor, according to some people. However, what people aren't talking about is that that algorithm has not been applied to Facebook groups. So there's an opportunity to start a group for people who might have a shared specific health interest, like self-care after treatment or cancer prevention, or if you are a very specific regional clinic, perhaps it is community health related. I would strongly suggest, if you have an interest in starting a group, that you talk to our facilitator, Dan Hinman, or ask Colleen Young, who's very involved in the Mayo social media network. They both have really good expertise and background in hosting groups and starting online communities. In the next slide, Twitter is another place where we actually spent a lot of time. The old saying, and I'm not sure it's so true anymore, was that Facebook was for people you'd invite over to the house and Twitter was for people you wanted to get to know. Well, it certainly proved out for the organization that I was working with. We were using hashtags that we knew were widely used to attract people who were following that topic. For example, children's nonprofit, or hashtag children, hashtag healthcare. And you can find a full list of the healthcare hashtags at, appropriately, the Healthcare Hashtag Project, which is run by Simpler, and that is spelled SYMPLUR if you're not familiar with them, but just Google hashtag Healthcare Project. I'm sorry, the Healthcare Hashtag Project. A tip about Twitter, please be sure to include a link to your landing page, either in your Twitter bio or not with every post, but I'd say maybe 20 to 30% of your posts. Twitter is really about strong engagement. I found the 5-3-2 rule worked really well on Twitter. 5% was sharing what other people were talking about. 3% was sharing original content, and 2% was, 20% was self-promotional. So 50, 30, 20%. And in the next slide, YouTube is something that, frankly, I think more healthcare organizations really need to be taking advantage of. 75% of those of us in the United States watch YouTube. That's according to Pew Research. 75%. That's a lot of potential donors. So I would be sure to include a description of the video with those key search terms that, of course, you have already figured out, or those healthcare hashtags that you're going to find. Really help people find you. I also tell my clients, you know, it's okay to be a little lazy. Take a shorter version of that video and maybe post it to Facebook or to other social media platforms. There is nothing wrong in that. In the next slide, I need to highlight Pinterest. I really think that Pinterest is underutilized by healthcare organizations. Let me just throw a couple of stats at you. We know, again, according to Pew Research, that 41% of all women in the United States, all American women, 41% are using Pinterest. That's crazy. That's a huge number of women. We also know from studies that women hold the healthcare information for most families. No disrespect to any males out there who hold that information, but I can tell you that for most of the people I know, this actually bears true. So I did a quick Pinterest search on cancer, and I found some great cancer information from an organization in the UK. It surprised me that the results that popped up around cancer searches were not out of the US. So I think there's a big opportunity on Pinterest. Your audience is there and you can go get them. Again, being careful there to make sure that you're using those key terms that you know people are searching on. And the next slide, I get asked this question a lot, and I don't blame you for asking it. That's a really good question. How complicated is it? Next slide. The answer is, well, how complicated do you want it to be? You know, we originally had just 2 team members. It was myself as the director of communications and a website manager, and that was it. And we were running on a really lean budget, as most nonprofits do. That shouldn't surprise anybody. And honestly, in the beginning, only my webmaster had the time to be focused on social media. After about a year, we finally added a full-time content manager, and I honestly would call her a storyteller. That was really her talent. If I were hiring today, I would definitely want someone with the technical skills, website management and analytics, as well as a storyteller who could keep track of content management production. We added just 2 software tools. We added, at that point, Constant Contact for sending out e-newsletters and email marketing. And we also eventually purchased a paid analytics tool like Clicky. I'll get back to that in just a second. The organization was already using a credit card processing software on the back end. That shouldn't surprise anybody. After a couple years, we did switch over to Blackbaud tools, only because they integrated beautifully with Razor's Edge, not a big surprise. And we were trying to save the development team's sanity because we were bringing in enough new donors, about, like I said, about 30% of the donors new donors every year were coming through the website and through online efforts. And our development team was really having trouble keeping up. So the fact that we could just automatically populate new names, zip codes, and email addresses straight into the donor base did help. Now, honestly, I think the next slide should come with a trigger warning, so just beware. The next slide, this is crazy. This is all of the marketing technology tools that were available on the market in 2017. This is a representation of over 5,000 companies representing 6,000 products. Let me just tell you, just stop and breathe, because it's okay, because you don't need all of these. If you look at any one of those columns, let's pick the green column. Actually, I think the blue column's data. If you look at the blue column and you see those blue bars, those are actually subcategories within the larger category. You're only going to need things like a bulk email program and an analytics program. If you don't already have a credit card processing software behind the scenes, you really don't need a huge budget or an enormous staff, although I'm sure salespeople will like to tell you otherwise. You might, however, want to be on really, really good terms with your IT department. And if your clinic or your small medical practice doesn't have an IT department, I strongly recommend contracting with a reliable IT professional, because I guarantee you, and the Mayo Clinic will tell you, based on some experience this morning, that things don't always go the way you think they're going to go when it's time to do that webinar, or time to send that bulk email, or time to do that Facebook Live presentation. So it never hurts to have an IT professional in your corner. And on the next slide, let me just talk for a second about analytics. You've heard me say get a paid analytics tool. I know a lot of professionals say, hey, use Google Analytics, it's free, and that is a word we really like in the nonprofit world. However, please learn from my pain that I learned the hard way. If by any slim chance you are going to go through a merger, and we know there have been a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the last couple of years in healthcare, if you might have to change the website URL, you will lose all of your previous data from Google Analytics. They see that updated URL as a whole new website. So your data is everything. It is that gold at the end of the rainbow. It tells you what's working and what isn't. It also lets you make the case for a bigger budget and for more headcount. You see where I'm going with this, right? So don't trust something that important to a free tool. You want to know that you have more control over your analytics. In the next slide, let's talk about the secret and the secret sauce for what worked and what didn't work. These are just lessons that I learned over the years. First and foremost, you heard me refer to the landing page. You know, that's where your call to action really has to be crystal clear. Use multiple landing pages. The software that we were using on our website allowed us to have, I think, up to 10 landing pages at any given time. And it surprised me, we used all of them. In fact, there were times where we honestly could have used 14 or 15 different landing pages. You're going to need one for maybe an upcoming event. You're going to need one for a specific campaign. You're going to want one around the holiday campaign. And you might want two where you can do some A/B testing in a single campaign. Do you know that 66% of donors, 66%, have volunteered in the last 12 months? And of those 66% that volunteer their time, 85% of them will give to the nonprofit that they volunteered for. So your call to action has got to be super clear on what you want them to do. How do you want them to sign up? What information do you want to get? I would suggest to go lean on asking for their information. Again, you're still trying to build trust. And for our purposes at the time, their full name, their zip code, and their email address worked beautifully. That was all we needed. The next slide. Great content brings great results. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? But before you even get them to your landing page and your website, they need to see great content from you out there on the internet. That content needs to be optimized so that search engines can find you. But honestly, SEO isn't everything. In fact, Google will tell you that right now they're looking for great content. And I'll tell you a secret. This kind of surprised me, but I've seen it bear out. The more authentic or rougher the video, the more interaction you'll actually get, believe it or not. So don't worry about, oh my gosh, I got to hire a video crew and I got to have it professionally done at our local TV station. No, you don't. You can shoot it with your smartphone. You can do a little rough editing around the edges and throw it up there on your YouTube channel, or throw it up there on your website or Facebook. Trust me, it will get great engagement. In the next slide, please put social media into the context of your larger plan. Don't do it just because everybody's doing it, and don't do it just because it's the popular thing to do. How will being on social media, a couple different platforms, help you get to your goal? A few years after we started on Facebook, my new website manager walked into my office and said, oh my God, we need to be on Foursquare. And I really challenged that. I asked her to explain how people checking in online when they were physically at our campus was going to help us find new donors. And the reality was she couldn't. And I couldn't figure it out either, to be honest with you. So be really picky about the social media outlets that you use. You really don't need to be on every single one. Pick 2 to start. And go from there. Spend your time and your resources on outlets that integrate well with what you're trying to accomplish. And let me just say this. There are always new social media platforms popping up. I don't know if anybody remembers Ello. I think it lasted for about 15 seconds a couple years ago, and it's already gone. If you make a mistake, if you are on a platform and it's just not giving you the results you want to see after 3-4 months, fine, drop it, move on to something else. But know why you've got a presence there. In the next slide, stay focused on your goal. I would say, it's super, super easy to get distracted by social media. Lee Ace calls Twitter the gateway drug to social media, and it is so true. You could find yourself spending half a day on Twitter and getting nothing else accomplished. But in your case, you know that it's about raising dollars. It's not about the number of followers. It's not about the number of people who friended you or waved to you. It's about raising the cash. So review your analytics at least once a month. I would say even once a week, and your goals every quarter. If it's not working, great, test something else. That's the beauty of social media. I have to say I'm currently working with a private medical practice, and they are on every social media outlet. And you know what? None of it is getting them what they want. It's not getting them to their goal. And the bottom line is because they don't know what they should be measuring or how to measure it. So be really clear as you go into this what you want out of it. And the next slide, it's funny. One of the things that really hasn't changed in marketing or in PR is this, that you have to commit for the long haul, right? I mean, stick with your key messages and your story over time so that when the new people come find you, they hear what the people who found you a year ago heard. Yes, we update key messages over time, but I would say don't make a 180-degree turn from your original messages. Make sure that they are consistent with your original story. Even if you do go through that merger and acquisition, find a way to make sure that people still understand who you are long after you've started this. So with that, I'm just going to finish with the last slide. If you have any questions that come up for you after today, I know that always happens for me, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on the Mayo Clinic social media network. You can also email me directly or find me on Twitter. I'm happy to answer any and all questions or brainstorm with you because this can be challenging. And I just want to throw a thank you out to Sean and Margaret from Mayo Clinic who are behind the scenes, who've been helping out, and to our facilitator, Dan.
Well, and thank you, Chris. I really appreciate all this very practical information on how to find more donors and raise more money using social media. Let me ask, if you said up front that you had some mistakes that you learned along the way, that maybe you could share in more detail later. Is there anything kind of top of mind you'd like to share with us at this point that's a little bit of a, wow, we wish we hadn't tried this, or this worked out even better than we expected? Anything like that you could share with us?
I think one of the biggest challenges, even though I said you don't need a lot of tools, you do need the right tools. And I think one of my team's great challenges was that we were using a tool, which I won't name, that just wasn't keeping up with the changes that were happening in social media. They weren't keeping up with, say, the latest algorithm changes in Facebook and things like that. And we probably should have dumped the tool a lot faster, a lot sooner than we originally did. So that would probably be my number one. And again, that's a great thing about social media is if you make a mistake and find yourself going in the wrong direction, it's really easy to make a change and make a U-turn if you have to and try something else.
That's really good advice. It's easy to hang on to those things you're familiar with, those tools that you're familiar with. And if they're not working for you, don't be afraid to swap those out and try something else.
Well, and it's not like traditional advertising, where once you start a campaign, man, you are stuck with that campaign, right? You bought the 6-time rate, and you got to run that campaign for the next 6 weeks or next 6 months. That's the great thing about working in digital marketing, is that you can make a shift quickly if you see that something's just simply not getting you where you needed to go.
Yeah. So what platforms did you find to be the most successful for you in terms of when you were thinking with your nonprofit? Did you try 4 or 5 platforms, or did you narrow it down to just a couple? And which ones did you choose and why?
Well, Facebook was where we started, obviously. Twitter we picked up because we felt that it would allow us to get to more people faster, and it certainly did. And joining a couple of healthcare tweet chats worked well for our organization. YouTube was also really good because it allowed us to put videos out where, again, people weren't necessarily looking for the organization, but they were looking for videos about kids. And our video would come up, or our set of videos would come up. And those 3 channels worked really well. LinkedIn worked well to a point. We asked the board specifically to be sure that they included that they were board members for our organization. And as people worked with them and networked with them, they saw our organization's name coming up as something that these board members were really committed to. So that also worked really, really well. We would occasionally try other platforms, things like Snapchat, right? And again, the question that I was always asking the team was, why are we there? I still believe the Snapchat audience was just too young for what we were trying to accomplish. So we really were looking at people 30 and older who had disposable income, and I'm sure all the 30-year-olds are laughing out there going, I don't have disposable income, but there are some that do. And so we were really clear about making sure that whatever platform we were on, really our audience was there.
Yeah, Snapchat. So you actually tested Snapchat? No?
Yeah. I think we lasted about a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have some interesting discussions in the community about Snapchat, and I don't know anybody who's really found a good use for Snapchat yet in healthcare, whether it be fundraising or not, that they're saying, wow, this was really successful for us. So that's been a challenging one ongoing.
Agreed.
We've got a question, comments about paid ads. What about paying for your ad, using paid ads on social? And can it be worth it? Do you have a strategy for that?
Well, I think it goes back to budget and what you're trying to achieve. The challenge with running any ads is at the moment you do that, your G&A costs are going up, and that's lowering the net amount that you're actually raising. So we were always looking for free things to do first, and paid ads were always a secondary for us. But there were times, like, for example, if we were working on an event, that we might put some of the event budget into advertising the event locally, in just a specific region. And that worked well for us. So I think you've got to use it judiciously, knowing that at the end of the day, if you're in the business of raising money, you really want to make sure that you are squeezing every dollar you can. That's not to say that buying ads are bad. I want to be really clear about that. It just was never our first choice, and always, we were always bearing in mind that we were trying to make sure that every dollar we spent was going as far as it could go.
Yeah, they really have to be aware of that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in the presentation, you showed a sales funnel, kind of the various steps. Which of those points in the sales funnel would you say that social media enters into?
Oh, definitely awareness. Definitely at the top. Although you'll certainly see social media show up at all the different levels. But in terms of going for the biggest number of people we can reach first, which is what awareness is about, social media is definitely at the top of the marketing funnel. Yeah. And just clear, if you can refer to that funnel, I've seen it with different labels. You can refer to it as a marketing funnel. I've seen fundraisers refer to it as a development funnel or conversion funnel, or you can call it a sales funnel. It's just a question of, the different labels and what is your visitor's journey for finding you and for eventually opening their wallet and giving to your organization.
Yeah. Do you have, can you think of, I don't want to put you on the spot about this, but you mentioned some real emphasis on the right calls to action. Can you recommend some particularly effective calls to action, both either that you'd use either through social or even through digital?
It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Let's assume that we're trying to get people to donate. I mean, that's what this is all about. We're trying to get people to donate. So I think it's things like come volunteer with us. Because again, back to that statistic where we know 66% of people in the US, 66% of adults are donating their time and volunteering. Why not start there? That is not a bad thing. Find something that they can come do for your organization, even if it's just painting a wall in a clinic one day or painting a wall in an outside garden for your organization. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because we know that after they've come and experienced who you are and what you do, 85% of them are going to open their wallets and donate to you. So I would, it doesn't always have to be donate now, donate now, donate now. Oftentimes we also used a help us raise awareness of this new legislation, which is something that nonprofits can do. I realize we have to be cautious around it. We, you can, if you're spending, I think it's less than 10% of your total budget on talking about legislation, nonprofits can indeed raise awareness about legislation. And so we would say, help us raise awareness about this important bill that's going to help kids and family for healthcare. And, that often worked too. That would bring those friends of friends back to our website, and we'd gain more donors that way as well. So you might not ask for donate right out of the gate, but of course that's eventually where you want to bring them.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So social isn't just to plug donations, but social is to build those relationships. And I love this idea about asking them to volunteer. That's a really great one. Engaging them in various kinds of activities or advocacy for your nonprofit could take a whole bunch of forms, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're building that relationship, right? We want to keep building that relationship. And not everybody's going to say that they've got an extra $10 to give or an extra $100 to give. But you'll find that once you build the relationship and maybe somebody becomes a monthly donor, I've seen a lot of that happen. It's those donors that end up, and I should have added, those are the people you end up starting to really cultivate in a face-to-face meeting. And those are the people that ended up, giving us 5-figure, 6-figure checks after a while. So it can happen.
Great. Hey, we've got another question in the comment section. Can you tell us more about the analytics tool you used? Did it include any details about donors, for instance, age or other demographics?
I wish it had. Oh my gosh, that would have been awesome. I haven't found an analytics tool yet that can do that. Unfortunately, it's just looking at the data that's coming from the internet. And, you know, yes, there are other tools that exist on the development side, huge databases that I know. I think one of them is actually called Wealth Engine, where once we saw someone's name come through social media, we would flip it over to development. Once they gave, we would flip it over to development for cultivation. And if development saw that that person was giving repeatedly, they might run their name through Wealth Engine. But back to the original question, the analytics tools that we used were specifically looking at things like, you know, where is traffic to the website coming from? What pages are they most interested in? How long are they staying on those pages? Because we were seeing some pretty sticky numbers, like people spending 3-4 minutes on a page, which is pretty unusual. If they're bouncing immediately off a page, which pages have the highest bounce rates and are just losing those visitors right away? So we might have changed that information as well. It was sometimes the same information that we were getting from Google Analytics, but it was a nice double check against Google Analytics. And people might be surprised to hear that no matter which analytics tool you use, you're going to see different data than you see from Google Analytics. That's not a bad thing. Take the median and declare success and go with it.
Great advice on that. I like the idea that you have two sources of data when you have something to measure against Google Analytics. You mentioned earlier.
Can I make a note about that real quick?
Sure.
I saw something yesterday on Twitter. I actually retweeted it. Something about using the native tools that the platforms have in them. Like Twitter's got its own analytics, and you know, Pinterest and Instagram, they've all got their own analytics. Be careful, because again, you know, it's very biased to that platform. You want another tool to be able to double check, compare, contrast, and don't be surprised if you see different numbers.
Yeah, great insight there. You mentioned earlier about the use of video in campaigns, and the idea that an authentic video doesn't necessarily have to be a super polished video. And do you have any tips about the best way to distribute videos once you produce them? Any ideas about that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Honestly, the only tip I would give is that don't hesitate to be lazy. Nonprofits, you know, we're always trying to stretch that dollar as far as we can get it. Once you've shot that video, take a shorter piece of it. You know, maybe it's only a 20-second piece of a 1:30 video, and put it on a different platform. You know, put it on Facebook, or you know, put it on your website, or if the 1:30 is on your website, put the shorter one out on YouTube. There are other platforms you can distribute video on. Instagram comes to mind with the stories, but you could also maybe put it on Vimeo. Well, now Vimeo, frankly, is really high-end video. But nonetheless, I would make sure that, you know, I've looked at all the different places I can post that, so that, you know, people continue to find you. From a communications perspective, I can tell you that it used to be that, you know, we could hold all the information we got every day. Now we know we get bombarded with thousands of messages, not just through social media, but text and advertising everywhere we turn. And we hold anywhere, I've heard estimates anywhere from 5 to 8 messages a day. That's it. That's it. So we get so overwhelmed, we hold on to very little information. My point being, you're going to have to repeat that video a few times in a few different places for people to see it. Same thing with your message. Repeat it a few times in different places so that people are sure to find you.
Yeah, great tip. You know, as we try to sort out the Facebook algorithm, one of the things Facebook tells us is they're going to prioritize video. And they think that video creates more interactions, And also Facebook Live is a tool that Facebook's really encouraging and prioritizing in their news feed. So there's an opportunity to do some live video as well, I think. Well, Chris, we're at the end of our time. And thank you so very, very much for all this great information. We really appreciate it. Someone's asked in the comment section if you'd enter your email for contact there so that they can have that. Not everyone was able to read that on your final slide. So for the rest of those on the call, keep in mind that next month we have another webinar. In June, we've got the residency. So we hope to see you next month and again in June if that works for you. So thanks very much, Chris and Sean and Margaret. And thanks everyone for joining with us today. We'll talk to you next month.